So a lot of people have been constantly asking me what are some of the best squads that you can get in Enlisted, and I've always tried to help them by making as many top 5 best premium squads video, but it appears that some people either want to get other squads, or some people just don't have the money to get a certain squad, and they want other squads, or they think a certain squad is cool, or they think, well, this squad is better at this specific tier, which is what we're going to be getting into today. And today we're going to be rating every premium squad that Germany has from tiers 1 to tier 5, and because we're doing Germany today, we're going to be doing the Soviet Union, the United States, and Japan in no specific order, coming up after Germany, because apparently all of you guys want to hear about Germany first, so that's that, and because everyone plays Germany. That said, this video has been made possible for the friends at Discord. If you haven't liked, subscribe, or join the Discord, highly suggest that you do. But that said, let's get started with the rating every German premium squad that we have in game. Notice, this will only cover the squads that we have right now and not before or after. So that's that. And starting up, we have the MP18. This comes at tier 2 and is essentially a World War I weapon used by the Germans in trenches. And this thing essentially has a 32 round magazine with a hit power of 6.8 and a rate of fire of 520. Honestly, if you ask me, who are we kidding? Like, this is actually a good gun, but at the same time it's also a very bad gun because you have a better option in the tech tree with the MP34O. Not only is this thing better in most regards and in almost every regard, it is exactly the same in terms of the hit power if you fully upgrade this. The only difference is that if you don't fully upgrade this. So that's that. The in-game version is much cheaper and doesn't require you to get gold. Granted that the MP18 is only 875 gold. But that is that. In my personal opinion, I'm not going to be giving this any rating above 5 out of 10. I would say this definitely deserves a 3 out of 10 because it's not completely useless and at the same time it's very unique. So that's that. Moving on, we have the Panzer W42T. This is actually a German tank that was essentially captured from the Czechs. And this thing has a lot of good things. One of them is the speed. The speed is essentially 42 kilometers per hour. It has a 37mm gun and has a machine gun and some smoke grenades. The frontal armor and the turret armor is extremely lacking because this is essentially classified as a light tank, and this is at tier 1. Now, my personal opinion is that this is worse than the MP18, and the reason is because it has no armor, the gun is lackluster, and although it is fast, really in Enlisted you shouldn't be relying on fast because, well, your main goal is to kill enemies, and fast, unfortunately, Enlisted doesn't really help. That said, because of all those qualities combined, I'll say this actually gets a 1 out of 10. Because there are so many better options. For example, the Panzer II-C has a 20mm autocannon. The Panzer III-B has a better N37. The 75-32 has much more better armor and essentially has a 75mm gun. And the J version essentially has the exact same armor profile and a 50mm gun. So who are we kidding? Moving up, we have the Italian squad, the Italian Rifleman squad, the Italian Marines, and the Moschetto M91. This is essentially an Italian bolt-action rifle that has 6 rounds and a high rate of fire at 62 with a hit power of 23.6, and it is, of course, well, bolt-action. Literally should surprise no one, and this comes at BR1. In my personal opinion, this is actually one of the better rifleman squads that you have at tier 1. The only issue, and I used to repeat, the only issue is the fact that this has no engineer, and what makes this worse is that this is a rifleman squad, meaning that you can essentially get the exact same rifleman squad for every other, well, for every tier that Germany has, because you're going to be getting your rifleman squad first, and so forth. So why are you going to be getting this squad except for them being cool? Honestly, it's going to be rated higher than the Panzer 38T because, well, let's just say this squad is not bad, but at the same time, it's just unique. So that's that. I'm going to rate it a 3 out of 10. Moving on, we have the flamethrower tank. This is the Panzer IIF, and this is essentially a flamethrower tank at tier 1. And to be honest, at its job at burning people, it's pretty good. But in terms of everything else, the hull armor, the speed, it is very lacking because, number one, this has no main gun. It only has a machine gun, which is sad. And the other thing is the fact that it has no main cannon. If you go up against a tank, you will essentially die. If you go up against infantry that are expecting you and know how to kill you, which is actually pretty easy to kill this thing, then you will die. If I were to put this on a 1 to 10 scale, I honestly will put this at a 2. Because it's not useless, but it's usefulness is very lacking, unless you're just here for the memes. So that's that. Moving on, we have Tier 2, and we have the SDKFZ251. And what it is essentially a half-track that can essentially act as a mobile spawn. Now, personally, I would say this is essentially worthless because we have the 75mm version, but for those who don't know, that was an event squad, and if you haven't gotten that event squad, then this essentially is your tank, or should I say APC. This thing has a 7.92 machine gun mounted on the roof, or should I say the right above the driver's hatch, and in my opinion, this is a fairly armored APC for its usage, and in my personal opinion, this is a very good APC at getting the job done. My only gripe is that you're not really going to be using it in combat, and the other main gripe is the fact that the SCKFC7, which is in-game and is cheap and essentially does everything better in a certain opinion, is essentially just that, but without the machine gun. And like I said, you don't really need a machine gun, because if you're firing a machine gun from an APC, you're just telling everyone, hey, I'm here with an APC, please destroy me. Once again, why would you put a machine gun, or why would you ever use a machine gun on the APC? Now, if it's a 75mm cannon, that's completely different, because you do need a 75mm cannon. A machine gun, not really. So, essentially, I would rate this as a 3 out of 10. It's not a bad vehicle, and it gets the job done, which is spawning people in, but it's not really worth it. As a matter of fact, the SDKFZ7 is a much better option, and I highly suggest that you get that. But that said, let's move on to the Panzer SFL1C. This is essentially an experimental tank destroyer, and looking at the speed, it is 55 kilometers per hour, making this thing very fast. At the same time, the hull armor and the rear armor is essentially 30, which is a joke. On the other hand, the 50mm cannon is essentially quite of lackluster at this point, and in my personal opinion, this is actually worse than the Panzer 38T, because at least that thing has less speed but more armor with 50 at the front. This thing only has 30, and let's be honest, the speed really doesn't matter in this game unless you're a plane, so that's completely different. And yeah, this is not worth it. I would say this is a 2 out of 10. That said, let's move on to BF110C6. This is a BF110C6 with, I kid you not, a 30mm cannon, and yes, you heard that correct, a 30mm cannon, and a few 7.92s, to be exact, 5 7.92s. And to be honest, I will rate this at a 1 out of 10. And usually I would not say 0 out of 10, because at this point, something, or should I say anything in Enlisted can kill, and if you can't kill anything, that's a 0 out of 10. And hence, the BF110C6 can kill. The ability to kill is just extremely limited because its 30mm cannons are good at taking out clustered infantry, and you have to know where you shoot, and on the other hand, it's good for taking out planes, but besides that, it can't do anything else. As a matter of fact, the regular BF110, or should I say the amount of regular BF110s in the tech tree is much better in every single regard, with someone coming with rockets, 37mm cannons, and 250kg bombs. So that's that. Why will you get this thing? There's better options in the tech tree. So that's that. Moving on, we have the Gewehr 41M. This is essentially a Gewehr 41 that is a semi-automatic rifle at tier 3. This has a 10-round system, and to be honest, it's a pretty good squad for this tier. But the only question is that this does lack, once again, I kid you not, an engineer, which is so vital in this stage and era. And the other thing is that you have the Gewehr 41, which is much better than the Gewehr 41M, because, let's be honest, the Gewehr 41 has better sights, and the Gewehr 41 is, well, free. So, once again, why would you be getting the Gewehr 41M? It just doesn't make sense. That said, for that reason, the Gewehr 41M will be rated a 3 out of 10. Not completely useless, but at the same time, there are much better alternatives in the tech tree, and whose alternatives are free. Moving on, we have the TZ-45. This is essentially an Italian submachine gun that was used essentially like the British Sten, in the sense that it was meant to be cheap manufactured, and for its job, it's actually really good. The 6.8 damage is really good. The rate of fire is 690, which is actually much better than the weapons that we have at tier 3 for the Germans. And of course, this recoil is very manageable and has 40 rounds, something that the Germans don't have. And at the end of the day, is it worth it? And the answer is yes. Of course, there are just better premium squads at this point, but if we're talking about how good this thing is, I would say that I'll rate this a 6 out of 10, because not only is this thing unique, not only is this thing better than the current SMG that we have in-game, which is the ZK383 and MP35-1, but it also comes with an engineer and essentially a squad that is really good at its job, which is to kill people, and it has 40 rounds, which is insane, if you ask me. But is it that overly insane? No. And if you don't have the money, you don't have to buy it, but it does deserve a 6 out of 10. That said, moving on, we have the Walter A115. This is essentially a 10-round magazine rifle that essentially looks kind of like the STG-44, but not quite. The hit power is really high, able to kill anyone, and this is an engineer squad, meaning that you essentially will be using the squad to fire artillery emplacements, or should I say fire artillery at your enemies, and for specifically this squad, they have the ability to essentially use rockets, which is really good. That said, is it really worth it? And the answer is no. Number one, rocket artillery is way too underpowered for everyone's liking, and this gun, on the other hand, is not really overpowered. Once again, if this thing is at tier 3, why would you not be using the Gewehr 41? And let's be honest, every radio operator squad is exactly like this, or in some cases better. So why? For that reason, I'll rate this a 4 out of 10. Not completely useless, and it's pretty good at its job, but why would you get it is the question. After that, let's move on to the Stug 3G. This is a German tank destroyer that is actually really good, and let's be honest, this is a tank destroyer that has a 75mm gun, pretty good speed at 40 kilometers per hour, and the good frontal armor at 50 on the front, 30 on the side, 50 on the back, and 19 on the bottom. This essentially is the same for the turret armor, with the back being 30 instead of 50. Now, the question remains is, why would you be using this thing? For those who don't know, this thing essentially has no machine gun, so the only thing you can really do is to use this squad as a tank destroyer squad, and let's be honest, I personally prefer tanks that can do one of few things. One of them is, well, killing tanks, and the other is killing infantry, and because it doesn't have a machine gun, it's relatively hard to do so. And although it does have HE, this squad is really not that good. For one, you have a better version in every single regard, with the Panzer IV having, well, arguably a machine gun, multiple machine guns might I add, a 75, and much better frontal hull and turret armor than you. Heck, even the Panzer IV is much better in some regards. And overall, why would you get it? This tank destroyer is not that good. It's good at its job, which is taking out enemies, but it's not good at, well, overall in game. So for that reason, I'm gonna be rating this a 5 out of 10. Not completely useless, but at the same time, I wouldn't say this is useful, well, at least compared to Panzer IV, which at least has a turret, has better armor, and most importantly, is technically, in theory, has machine guns, and that's very, very good. That said, we have the Sniper Gewehr 41. Now, this thing is going to be coming in at tier 3, and the squad itself is looking pretty darn cool with their camouflage and their sniper rifle. To be exact, the sniper rifle is essentially Gewehr 41 with a scope, and then they decided to add it at tier 3, which to my opinion is not a bad squad. As a matter of fact, I will say this is a pretty good squad because this is a sniper rifle, and if you know how to do your sniper rifles, or should I say, if you know how to shoot your sniper rifles, especially these semi-automatic sniper rifles, then you essentially know what you're doing. And if you know how to use the Sniper Gewehr 41, then you essentially will be you'll be essentially pretty good at your job, which is to kill people. That said, it also comes with an engineer, and overall, it's pretty good in the sense that it's 10 rounds, it's pretty good. The hit power essentially will down everyone before they have the chance to shoot you, if you know what you're doing with the sniper rifle. That said, to recap, I think this deserves a 6 out of 10. Number 1, it's cool. Number 2, it's great. And of course, my personal opinion is the fact that this is a Gewehr 41, which is really, really good at its job, especially with a scope. So that's that. Moving on, we have the Ersatz M10. This is essentially a Panther that was essentially used to simulate M10 during the Battle of the Bulge. And this thing is not bad. For one, it does have a machine gun with a 7.92. On the other hand, it is, well, should I say, it does have essentially a turret. And that turret, unlike the regular M10, has essentially a lid over the thing, or should I say, it does have a top side. And the hull armor is actually pretty good. I would say it's pretty good. The hull armor is 80 on the front, 50 on the side, 40 on the back, and 26 on top, which is actually more than some other tanks. And the turret armor is a whopping 110, side of 45, back of 45, and top of 17. This, I would actually say, comfortably ranks at 8 out of 10. Of course, people are going to be criming war crimes, but on the other hand, this is a pretty good tank in the sense that it does come with a 75mm cannon, and essentially, in my opinion, it's a upgunned Panther with more turret armor and more hull armor, so that's really, really good. Highly suggest that you get this. I'll be rating this an 8 out of 10. Moving on, we have the 8.8 centimeter flak bus, or the Flak 37 SFL, and this essentially is a 88mm cannon mounted on essentially a German bus, or should I say tractor, and then sent to battle. And originally, this entire idea was meant to kill enemy planes. In-game, not only does it not do the job of killing planes, but you will essentially be a big identifier for enemy planes in the sense that they'll go for you first. Because number one, you have no armor. Number two, this thing is slow. And the third thing is that this thing is massively huge. As a matter of fact, it's so big that it's impossible to hide this. And on the other hand, the 88mm, although it is good for taking out essentially tanks, it's not really good for taking anything else. So to recap, this is going to be sitting at a 3 out of 10. Not really useful in the slightest, but still can kill people. That said, we have the MG42 Early. This is essentially a German MG42 with a hit power of 12 and has a 50-round magazine. It also has a rate of fire of 460 because this is an MG42, surprise, surprise to absolutely no one. To recap, this is a very good machine gun. It's really useful at long range, and to be honest, this thing is really good at just chewing through enemies. As you will find out, this thing will run out of ammunition really quickly, meaning that you essentially be having more time to reload the thing than to use the thing. But it is really good at its job, and that is to shoot enemies at long range, and most importantly, if you know how to use this thing using burst fire, then you essentially know what you're doing. So that's that. To recap this, I'll say it gets comfortably an 8 out of 10, if not a 9 out of 10. But that's that, let's move on to the other tank. Or should I say, rocket launcher system, MLRS. And that is the 15cm Panzer W42. This is essentially a 15cm rocket device mounted on chassis of essentially SDKFC that is heavily modified. This thing essentially does have a machine gun and also has 158mm rockets. Now, the thing about this is that this is actually pretty useful at taking out things. The downside is that it has no armor. But to say this is completely useless is not true, because this is very useful. One, you can take out tanks because, well, you have a 158mm, let's say, rocket. And the other thing is that this thing is actually pretty mobile at 46 kilometers per hour, which is actually really important because you have no armor, so good luck. And on the other hand, this really takes out infantry and essentially is used to clear out bunkers or buildings in which enemies are at, or just clear the entire ground in which the enemies are at. Therefore, I would say that this gets a 6 out of 10. The only issue is the fact that this has no armor, and pretty much if you get hit, you're pretty much going to die. So that's that. Moving on, we have the Gat III. This is essentially a 20-round Gewehr 43, and essentially has the hit power of a Gewehr 43, and essentially has massive vertical and horizontal recoil, with the vertical at 103 and the horizontal at 20. That said, you're essentially going to be using this thing as a semi-automatic rifle, which is good. And on the other hand, this thing is at tier 5, meaning that this is pretty much useless. Because, let's be honest, if you're at tier 5 and you're still using semi-automatic rifles instead of the SCG-44, the FG42-2, or any other weapon in between that, well, with the exception of the CH-29, then you're doing something really wrong, because, yeah. This thing is completely useless at tier 5. To recap this, I would say this gets a 3 out of 10. Completely useless, and in my opinion, not really worth it unless you're just that close to the enemy and you don't have to worry about recoil. But then I would also argue the STG-44 does a much better job, so does the FG42 too, because those things are more accurate, and both of them can go full auto, which this thing can't. That said, let's move on to the Swy KP31. This is essentially the German PPS H43, except for this was made by Finland, and is, in my opinion, much better than the Soviet version, or should I say the equivalent, because this has a hit power of 6.6, rate of fire of 990, and 71 round magazine. So all the good parts and the lowered rate of fire means that this thing will be pretty doing well. On the other hand, this also comes in auto and semi-auto, but on the other hand, this does come at tier 5. Meaning that you're going to be competing against STG-44s, the FG42-2, the Sniper STG-44, and the MKB-42H, which, in all reality, compared to those, this thing sucks, but it doesn't suck compared to the Gat III, and to be honest, this thing I'll rate it comfortably an 8 out of 10, because it's really good. If you know how to use it, and most people do because it takes less than a second to use this, then, well, you will be shredding people, but my personal opinion is still the STG-44, and this thing, although it's good, is just not that good. That said, let's move on to the next one, which is the Kirchhoff FG. Now, this thing is an FG42-2 that has less rate of fire, but at the same time, 20 round magazine that is much more controllable, and the other thing is that the hit power is pretty good, and at tier 5. Now, the thing about this squad is that this comes with the Paratrooper squad, and Paratrooper squads in this game are really, really good. That said, without further ado, I'm just gonna rate this a 10 out of 10 because it's just that good. And finally, we have the Falwolf D9. This is a German Falwolf with 8 50-kilogram bombs, 2 20mm cannons, and 2 13mm machine guns. This thing is actually not bad, except for the fact that number 1, there are better options in games such as the BF109 G14, and this thing certainly does not have the turn rate of the G14. On the other hand, its other competitor is the BF109 D12, which essentially has much deadlier payloads with a 250-kilogram bomb and, well, worse turn rate, and it does have a 30mm cannon, so yeah, that's a problem. And of course, you have the BF109K4. This essentially is exactly the Falwolf 190 D9, with the exception of having a 30mm cannon and a 250-kilogram bomb. So at this point, I will rate this a 5 out of 10. It's not useless, and certainly does the job of shooting down planes, although I would argue there are better options for that. And the bombs are essentially pretty much useless because you can't kill anything except for if they're infantry. You can't take out tanks, so that's gonna be the other problem. But that's all it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the Discord. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.